Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, Dr. Anne Cavoukian.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for waking up so early and coming here to hear, hopefully, what will be an engaging talk. I will do my best. I'm very grateful that you would make the time to appear here today. And I want to start by thanking Anton for doing this wonderful series. I've attended a number of these talks, and they're always very interesting. I'm going to start by making a comment that is unrelated directly to my talk. And the only reason I'm doing it is because I want you to understand how important the headline can be. It's really, really important. And I'm just going to tell you a little story. When I first heard of this event, or at least heard of it online, I get the Longwoods letter, of course, and the emails. And I got this email, and the header, the subject line, was, and I have to read it because I keep forgetting it because it's so abhorrent to me, privacy, comma, a thing of the past. No question mark, as one of my fellow commissioners later told me. At least they could have put on a question mark. So I saw privacy, a thing of the past, and I do what I always do with these messages. I hit the roof, and I said, oh my God. And I emailed Manuela and Deborah, my right and left hands, and I emailed them and I said, let's write a letter to the editor or the editor equivalent immediately. Let's object. Let's do all this stuff. Do you know what this is about? And they said, Commissioner, it's about your talk. I said, what? My talk is being billed as privacy, a thing of the past? Are you kidding me? If any of you know me, I don't react well to things like this. And I just went nuts. And so poor Anton, I gave him enormous grief over it. And he was very gracious and kindly published an apology. And the reason I did hit the roof and I went to Anton and I said, you got to stop this, is because my biggest fear, and my team knows this, and I drive everyone in my office crazy, anytime there's a headline or a storyline or anything that is just a simple, there's not going to be any more privacy in the future, privacy, a thing of the past, no more privacy, get over it. Anytime I see that in an article, in a magazine, anywhere, we stop what we're doing, we write a letter to the editor, we write a comparable piece opposing it, we set the record straight. Because I know we're going to have privacy in the future. I know we can have privacy in the future. And I hope to demonstrate to you how we can have privacy and other efficiencies, other functionalities, such as health research and healthcare and security and biometrics and a whole host of other areas. But my biggest fear, so that's not my fear. My fear is that perception is going to become reality and people are going to be guided by the headline, by the one-liner. Because what do people do when they're running and you're busy in the morning and it's not your area? So when I read the Globe and Mail real fast in the morning and I go to the ROB section, I'm not an expert on economics, so I read the headlines, largely speaking, and I just get a feel of what's happening. And I must admit, that's what stays with me. So imagine my horror if all of the headlines are, you know, privacy, the thing of the past, get over it, there's no more privacy. That's what people are going to believe. And they're going to believe it over my dead body in association with the talk I'm giving. So I had to set the record straight. And it is my sincere hope that you will do that as well. Whenever you encounter comments like that, please challenge them. Because, and you don't have to take my word for it, I hope to show you strong evidence to the effect that we can have privacy and other functionalities, such as health research, which is invaluable. And I say this, oh, Anton wants to say something.
I'm alive and well. And I promise not to do it again.
Oh, I know, no. And Anton, you were wonderful and very gracious, and I so much appreciate it. But now at least you understand the reason why I reacted as I did. I'm speaking to you today also, and this is the other part that I want you to know. I'm not just speaking to you as a privacy commissioner or a regulator. I'm speaking to you as a patient. Those of you who know me know that I've had multiple neurosurgeries. I'm in and out of the hospitals. I'm having another MRI this afternoon. This is my life, and I'm great. I'm healthy. It keeps me well, but it is ongoing. And I rely on my wonderful doctors and the wonderful tests and the health research that allows me to stay so strong. I love my docs at UHN. I love them. They're wonderful. And I would go to bat for them and for the healthcare community. I'm a very strong supporter of electronic health records, despite the fact that from many in the privacy community, I get a lot of flack for that, because there is the potential for privacy invasion when there are electronic health records, which is why it is incumbent to embed privacy in the design of these records. And that's what I'll be talking about today. So that's the background. Let's start. Now you can see that my talk is there. I'm going to talk to you here, so I'm going to be looking over my shoulder as opposed to always walking back here and looking at the presentation outline, so bear with me. I hope to cover a lot of ground and really want to take your questions at the end. A lot of what I'm going to cover will be familiar to you, some may not be familiar to you, and I'm going to go quite quickly, but of course you'll have copies of this and my talks are my slides will be available afterwards. The obvious, the enormous importance of protecting personal health information. You know, the interesting thing about health information is its dual nature. On the one hand, because it is considered to be probably among the most sensitive types of personal information, that and financial information are the two at the top, but health usually is number one. You've got to protect it like Fort Knox. You've got to give it the strongest protection possible, keep it locked up, only let the authorized individuals access it. So on the one hand, very strong protection. On the other hand, it needs to be immediately accessible to your healthcare providers. You need it accessible like this, and you need it to be shared with those who have to give you care. So when I go to emergency, the last thing even on my mind is privacy. I want to make sure my docs can access the MRIs and all the stuff I've had done before, and this can be shared between the emergency physician and my neurosurgeon and my neurologist and my team. So everyone has to have immediate access, and this has to happen at the drop of a hat. So you've got these competing interests that both have to be respected. Add to that the need to access health data for health research purposes, which is invaluable. Where would we be without the amazing, amazing health research and informatics that has developed and advanced so much over the years? So all of this has to be achieved with this very sensitive information. How do you do that? This is not an easy task, and I'm not going to suggest that it is, but it is eminently doable. And that's why I ask you to think creatively. You know, sometimes people think, oh, privacy stands in the way of innovation. Nonsense. Privacy enables innovation. It requires creativity and innovation, and that's what I hope to talk to you about today, all the possibilities that are out there. Now, you may wonder, what's the big deal? Why do we have to protect health information so strongly? And I just got into a fight. When did I speak? Earlier this week at some event at Mars. And the gentleman said, and I felt badly because I mounted quite a strong opposition. He said, well, you know, maybe we should get over the paranoia associated with privacy. Oh my God, I just went nuts. Whenever you use language like paranoia in association with privacy, you do a great disservice to everyone, including yourself, sir. So I couldn't let it stand, even though the session was over and I insisted upon making a comment. It's not paranoia. Privacy is all about control. Privacy is about data protection and protecting the information that relates to you. And I'm just going to digress for a moment. If you look, it's not just a protection of your personal information and a personal right. It is fundamental to our freedoms. If you look at free and democratic societies, the essence of the freedoms arise from a base of privacy. And we know this historically, because if you look historically, as academics have done, at countries that have morphed from a free and democratic society into a totalitarian state, the first thread to unravel is privacy. That's why it's absolutely critical to our freedoms. Look at how much people are willing to give up in the pursuit of freedom. Look at the Middle East. Look at what's happening. Freedom is absolutely essential to the human condition. And so privacy is essential to thrive in a free society. So when you think of freedom and liberty, think of privacy. In that context, the ability to control your personal information, the Germans, the leading data protection country in the world, they call it informational self-determination. And this is a right enshrined in their constitution in 1983. And it is no accident that the Germans are the leaders in data protection worldwide. It is no accident that they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich and the complete cessation of all of their freedoms. So that is the context in which I ask you to consider the importance of control and protecting your personal information. Here, in the context of health records, it can have very direct consequences in terms of people's decisions not to seek treatment because they're afraid someone's going to find out something. In countries like the US that don't have a universal healthcare system as we do here in Canada, when I give these talks in the US, they are adamant they don't want some people to have their information. The insurer might change their insurance provisions. It may affect their employment abilities. There are many, many reasons why people are very protective of their personal information. So the fact that I disclose my health information to you, that's my personal choice. And I exercise complete control in doing that, which means my privacy is intact. I have chosen to share it because it serves my interests. I always feel like I've been given all these data points so I can speak better and to crowds like you in the healthcare system about how health impacts individuals and access to information. So that's my personal choice. I would never, ever suggest that anyone else should choose to speak publicly about their condition. It's their choice, and we have to respect that. As I said, I am a big proponent of electronic health records. In fact, I berate poor Richard Alvarez, who is a dear friend of mine, head of Canada Health Infoway, responsible for creating electronic health records across the country. And the reason I berate him is because I wish we could get them in here in Toronto. I wish we could get all our hospitals connected here in Toronto. Connect GTA is taking place here in Toronto, and God willing, next year, March 2013, that's the deadline, and I'm holding people to that because as Richard Alvarez points out all the time, he says, look, we've done all these things in Northern Ontario, in the West, and here and there, and we've got all this access and records that are flowing together. And I say, that's great, but you can't ignore the major populace, which is here in Toronto, the greater Toronto area. GTA is something like 4 or 5 million people. And this is where all the teaching hospitals are, the major teaching hospitals, and we need to collect information right here. I have personally experienced it, and this is why I think this happens to me, so I have more data points to speak about. I've been at a hospital where I've been rushed to emergency, and they do the CAT scan, and I need surgery immediately, and they can't take me because they're full. So they send me in an ambulance to another hospital, which is great, and the surgeon's available, and I'm being rushed in, and the surgeon says to my husband, where's her scan? And he says, I don't know where her scan is. Didn't they send it with the ambulance? And he said, no, it didn't arrive. It's not here. I can't do surgery on her without. Long story short, my scan, which they could not access electronically because they weren't linked to this other hospital, which was not part of UHN, my surgery got delayed 12 hours. And it was the most searing pain I've ever had because, of course, you can't be medicated during that period because, of course, you might be going into surgery any moment now. There are many consequences to not having electronic access to records and having hospitals connected in the GTA and otherwise, and that's why it's a pressing need. So I'm a big supporter of creating electronic health records, but hopefully in my lifetime. This has been going on way too long. I mean, with due respect, eHealth Ontario has been floating for years. I can't tell you the number of years, and I am not pleased with the progress that they're making in terms of electronic health records, or, in my view, the lack of attention to privacy which should exist there. So I push like crazy. I push everyone to try to develop records that are accessible and protective of privacy. We can do both, and that is always my goal. So the promise of electronic health records, I've touched on some of them. Immediate accessibility to records, very, very important. the kind of interconnection and the kind of care you can get when your physician is in a remote location. I mean, it's non-ending. But the peril is also there. Electronic health records, your data in the wrong hands, unauthorized parties who can access it much more readily. This is a cause for considerable concern and should always be on our radar when we review the creation of electronic health records and their accessibility. I'm just going to touch on this very briefly. I think you're probably familiar with some of the issues. People are impacted directly by unauthorized access to their records. And it always causes me enormous concern when people don't attend to the privacy issues. We're going to be talking about privacy by design in a moment, which is about embedding privacy protections up front into the design of your records and electronic health systems. And the payback is huge. People think, well, it costs too much, we can't do it. They're not considering the cost of a data breach, which I can guarantee will happen to you if you don't protect privacy, and the incumbent issues related to that, both in terms of liability, damage to your brand, damage to your reputation. And this just goes on and on. So it really is incumbent upon us to really focus on these issues. I'm just going to go very quickly. You don't have to take my word for it. There are lots of studies relating to the costs of privacy breaches. These are in the US. I think I've got one in Canada. I'm just going through this very quickly. You'll have a copy of my records. But just know that I think the cost per record, the most recent data is $214 per record, which is the cost associated with a data breach and health information records. And you multiply that by thousands of individuals, and you can imagine where the costs are. This one in particular is, there's several. In Durham County, a few years ago, roughly 84,000 people's personal health information was lost because it was transferred to a USB key that was not encrypted, and the USB key gets lost or stolen. See, here's the thing. People always say, well, that's human error, you can't avoid that. Yes, you can. You may not be able to avoid the theft or the loss. I grant you that. We are all human. Things happen. But what you can do is you can avoid the cost associated with that by having the data encrypted. The cost meaning the cost to privacy and the loss of the health information, because that doesn't have to exist. That can be protected, and in my view, it's not happening strongly enough. We've had another case recently in the Peterborough area. There's just so many cases involved in this, and people are being fired now for these unauthorized uses. I'm going to review the 3 leading causes of privacy breaches, and I'd like you to put it in your mind. And they are all important, but the sensitivity associated with the latter is much higher. The first is insecure disposal of records. Please shred your records. I mean, it's as simple as that. Shred them. Don't recycle them. I mean, you can recycle the shredded material. The biggest cause here, and this was in fact our first order, as you may be familiar with this, they were recreating a post 9/11 scenario downtown, and they needed masses of paper to recreate what it looked like in New York right after the towers went down. And so they went to a recycling company who had just received a shipment of lots of boxes, and they sent the boxes to the site. And alas, the boxes, it turned out, consisted of people's health records. And how could that possibly be? Well, this particular hospital meant to shred the data, and instead they put it in the recycling bin instead of the shred bin. And before they caught the mistake, the records were shipped out to the recycling company, and the rest, as they say, is history. So I got a call, I think it was on a Saturday night. I'm trying to remember, how did they get my home number? Oh, I know how it happened. Someone called, they called the CBC. Whenever there's a privacy breach, they don't call me, they call the CBC. CBC does have my number. We do interviews, etc. They had my home line, and they called and they said there's been this big breach, and they were describing it. And I, in typical fashion, went nuts. And I said to my husband, we got to go down there. And it was like a Saturday night. I was all dressed. We were going out to some dinner thing. And he said, are you crazy? I said, come on, George. My husband is a saint. So because most of my staff, my investigation staff, they don't live in town. It's a Saturday night. So we drive down to this thing. Anyway, first of all, we called the recycling place. And we said, are you kidding me? Get over there and retrieve all these records. We explained the situation. They were duly horrified. They said they would do it. But, trust but verify. You've got to go find out, did they really do it? And people walking by, that's how we heard about it. People were walking by, picking up these records, identifiable health records of individuals. Anyway, it all got taken care of. The recycling company did go and retrieve the records. I went down to make sure they had retrieved the records. It all worked out. But please, recycling doesn't equal secure disposal of records. Shred the records and shred them using crosscut shredders. I was at a conference many years ago. I love telling the story because I thought it was funny. I'm giving this kind of talk at a security symposium of some kind, and after my talk, this individual comes up to me because I'm making this point about shredding crosscut, and he said, yeah, that was right what you said. I said, oh, good, thank you. And he said, I'm a spy. I said, oh. What do you say to that? Hi, I'm Armenian. I don't know. Trying to think of some useful piece of information that I hadn't revealed. And he said, that crosscut shredding, oh, we hate that. He said, the regular strips, very easy to put together. No problem at all. We can recreate the document in no time. Crosscut shredding, oh, I hate that. I said, good. Crosscut, ladies and gentlemen. That's the message here. Okay, the next one. This is another order relating to this, but I'm going to jump to mobile and portable devices. We have a number of orders on this issue, and you will not want to have my office visit you to investigate this. If you are transferring information from your main server or computer onto a mobile device, like a USB key or laptop, and you don't encrypt it. Because the law in Ontario is you must do one of two things. You only have two choices. You can decrypt de-identify the data before you transfer it onto your USB key, which makes it perfectly fine to do, because then you don't have identifiable data. You have aggregate, anonymized data, that's fine, you can do that. Or you can encrypt the data and then transfer it. Those are your only two options. What you never ever do is just transfer, copy information to a USB key that is not encrypted and that is identifiable. That you don't do. Because of the ease with which these things get lost and stolen, and I understand that. It's very easy to lose sight of these things. But you can't do that with personal health information in identifiable form on them. It's that simple. And we have multiple cases of this, and it's completely unacceptable because it doesn't have to happen. It's that simple. You can get USB keys that are encrypted, that only accept encrypted information. I mean, there's so many solutions, so please don't unencrypt and transfer. Now, this is the most egregious, is the unauthorized access to records. And fortunately, it hasn't happened that many times, but it is very, very serious. And there are a number of things you can do to try to prevent this, which I'll talk about in a moment. I'm going to just talk about privacy by design in 2 seconds. But the most important thing you can probably do is ensure that there is an automatic log in your system, so at least after the fact, if there is a breach in this manner, you can easily find out who accessed whose records at what times and what manner. You can determine if it was an appropriate access or if the allegation is true. This is very, very costly. As you might imagine, people take great offense when they learn that the records have been accessed by someone's ex-spouse, and a lot of consequences arise. Okay, let me talk to you about a good news story. I want to talk to you about privacy by design for just a few moments. And privacy by design is something we developed in my office, but it's really gotten a lot of legs in the last few years. It's all about being proactive about privacy and embedding it into your systems and practices by design. meaning with intention, with forethought, on purpose. It's not an accident or after the fact occurrence. You're doing it intentionally. People think that by design is intended only to apply for like engineers and computer scientists to be embedded into the code, which it definitely is. But it's not exclusively for that. The actual words of by design reflect intentionally and with forethought. These are the 7 what we call foundational principles of privacy by design. And as you can see, it's all about being proactive. The goal is to try to prevent the privacy harm from arising. Avoid the data breach, prevent the harm by embedding it into the design of whatever you're doing, which can be your actual practices that you engage in, your operational procedures. This is the essence of privacy by design. And if you embed privacy as a default setting, what that means is you embed it automatically within your systems and your procedures so that someone doesn't have to ask for it after the fact. Someone doesn't have to look for the opt-out box or the what do I check to make this real. No one is, I shouldn't say no one. We know from the academic literature that the default rules, the power of the default is unprecedented. Why? Because everybody is busy, everyone is running around, you don't have time to look for the checkout box and I want to check, I want to, privacy, I don't want to use my information for these other purposes. The default rules. So in my world, I want the default to be one in favor of privacy, especially in a healthcare setting where the data are very sensitive. Security is absolutely critical to privacy. You can't have privacy without strong security. And the user should be at the center of all your operations. If you have user-centric practices, then the rest of this flows, because especially in a healthcare context, it should be all about the patient. It should be about protecting their data, giving the best healthcare services to the individual, and facilitating that, and keeping it user-centric will remind you of this. We can go over this later if we have time, but I just wanted you to know they're as simple and as difficult as these 7 principles. We have many examples of how these work on the ground now. We've got a paper coming out next month on operationalizing privacy by design, where we pull together all of in 9 different areas, we demonstrate how privacy by design works. So it's not just healthcare, there's CCTV cameras, biometrics, RFIDs, targeted advertising, multiple areas, security, public safety. We have multiple areas, and it's very real on the ground. It works now, and we can get to that at a later point. I wanted you to know this is now global, it's an international standard. 2 years ago in Jerusalem, it was unanimously passed as an international framework. Once a year, privacy commissioners and data protection authorities get together. Usually in Europe, it was in Jerusalem 2 years ago, and we vote on various resolutions. And this one was unanimously passed. And I should just assure you that these are not slam dunks in terms of the passage of these resolutions. So I was delighted with this. And the only commentary, the only questions was we need some guidance on how to make this real, how to operationalize it in various areas. And that's what my office has undertaken to do. Let me just go through a few things that you can do in your organization to, as we say, build a culture of privacy. Because if you can, I always say it starts with the board, and I talk to various boards. I've talked to the board of UHN, they're wonderful. I talk to doctors and healthcare providers all the time. Because if you can convey why this is important and that you can do privacy and achieve other functionalities, then it becomes a win-win proposition. So we can ensure that some of these measures can be introduced, and I'm not going to go through them each because I really want to get to what I think is the highlight of my talk, telling you some of the actual work that is taking place out there relating to enabling data analytics, health informatics, research to take place in conjunction with protecting people's privacy. So I'm just going to move forward now. Data minimization is absolutely key. Sorry, I've got these two things back here. I've usually been mic'd once, but not twice. No problem. Data minimization is all about stripping the personal identifiers from the data, the clinical data, for example, in a healthcare context, and then enabling the data to be used for research purposes or a variety of other purposes in a way where the privacy harm has virtually been eliminated because you've removed the personal identifiers. See, the privacy harm starts and ends with the personal identifiers associated with the data, which make it personal health information. If you don't have the name, address, the OHIP number, the personal identifiers associated with the data, you're golden. You can do what you want with that data. And think of all the research possibilities, and it just grows. So we always say start with data minimization is absolutely key to privacy. It's one of the strongest protections you can have in place. And I wrote a paper with Dr. Khaled El-Imam a number of years ago, and I think I have copies of it. Yes, this is my favorite paper. So whoever comes up here, you can have these papers, and they're on our website. But this is just amazing. And the title, Dispelling the Myths Surrounding De-Identification, Anonymization Remains a Strong Tool for Protecting Privacy. Now, let me tell you why I focus on this paper and what led to it. You may have heard of some of the literature coming from Latanya Sweeney and Paul Ohm relating to the ease with which re-identification of de-identified data can take place. This was really a big deal 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago. And I love these guys. I mean, Latanya Sweeney I've known for years. I've gone down to her university in the States to speak, and she's a dear colleague. However, I also berate them regularly because of the messaging that has been associated with their articles. And at this conference in Jerusalem, I went up to Paul Ohm. I said, how can you put out that article, the articles you're doing on the ease of re-identification? People, the takeaway from these articles have been, don't bother de-identifying. It's not worth it. It's, it can just be re-identified so quickly. It's nonsense, first of all. It cannot be re-identified quickly. So I'm saying this to Paul Ohm, berating him in the hallways, and I love Paul. He's wonderful. He's invited me to speak at his conference in January. So I'm always on good terms with these people. But he said to me, and he was right, he said, Commissioner, read the article. That's not what I say in the article. I said, I've read the article. I know that's not what you say in the article. But you read the headline, read the title. What is people's takeaway? It's that thing that I led with at the beginning. People's takeaway is that it's not that big a deal to re-identify. In fact, it is. And Paul Ohm and Latanya Sweeney will tell you that as well. It's extremely difficult to re-identify. You need a particular skill set. You need a particular set of data. You need a very, very powerful computer and system. You need a lot of things to be in place to be aligned to re-identify de-identified data, especially if the data have been strongly de-identified, which generally speaking they haven't. So both Latanya and Paul would agree with me, and have, and they say, well, if you read the article carefully, that's not what we say, and I agree with that. But very few people read the article carefully, and the takeaway, even today, I was just at another conference a couple of days ago, they said, oh, well, it's so easy to re-identify. It is not. So if you take one thing away from here today, please take away that if you strongly de-identify data, the ease of re-identification is a myth. De-identification is your strongest tool. And thanks to Dr. El-Imam, we have a wonderful de-identification tool that he developed that shows you the particular protocol. It de-identifies the data, it enhances data quality in the process. It's a total win-win, and it allows research to take place on de-identified data. It's absolutely brilliant. I encourage you all to take a look at this. Now, this is, I love this because I want to give you examples of how it works, and I don't want you to just take my word for it. So Dr. El-Imam was hired to create a data set associated with this heritage prize that is awarded in the States. And he was asked to de-identify data so that there could be some de-identified data, and then the prize related to people making predictions for future use. What he didn't know, so he de-identified the data, a huge data set. And what he didn't know is that, unbeknownst to him, the organizers had hired a very skilled, like ethical hacker kind of guy, very skilled expert to try to re-identify the data. So they said, give it your best shot. They gave him all the resources he needed, and he tried to re-identify it. He couldn't re-identify it. That's what I love about the story. He tried, and he did have the skill set, the resources, everything you would need to re-identify and do it. And it just speaks to the success of Khaled's de-identification tool and the success of the process of de-identification. In addition to that, Khaled and his colleagues reviewed the literature on re-identification to see, well, how big a deal is this? And what they found was, first of all, only about a quarter or a third of the time was re-identification successful. So right from the get-go, even if the data hadn't been strongly de-identified, the success rate was very low. Then he looked at the studies in the health area to see what happened with health data. He found that only 2 of the 14 studies the re-identification studies were made on data that had been strongly de-identified. And then when you look at those 2 cases, only 1 of the 2 attacks had been made on health data in those cases, and the re-identification rate was less than 1%. I think it's 0.13%. It's like nothing. The reason I want you to take this away and tell people is it just speaks to the enormous strength of de-identification and how you should continue to engage in that practice. There's more and more that comes out in this area, but this study is just amazing. And this one was done with Craig Earle. I should mention that. And I've got to give you the title of the talk. The article, it's called Secure Probabilistic Deduplication of Databases. I love that. And it was an amazing, what they did was they used a system of homomorphic encryption, very strong form of encryption. And what it enabled them to do is they could compare. You could do data analytics, you can do health informatics, you can do the comparisons of the data for health research purposes in multiple data sets without any identifiable data being accessed. So you encrypt the data, and the analytics, the comparisons, the mathematical matches take place in the encrypted sphere. And I mean, that is just brilliant, because if you can deal with just encrypted values, do the research you need to do and conduct the mathematical operations you require in that space, it's brilliant. There's no privacy harm. It speaks to the strength of engaging in health research without any of the privacy concerns that are typically associated with health research. When I speak to different privacy crowds, some of whom are really strong on privacy, they really object to my position on supporting health research, because it's people's health data. People should be able to remove their data. They don't want it to be at risk. I agree, it shouldn't be at risk, but we have systems now that remove it from that sphere of risk. And so this is the win-win proposition that we have to engage in. And the other thing I have to tell you that I just glossed over when I was going over the 7 foundational principles. The 4th principle is positive sum, not zero sum. Privacy by design is all about achieving multiple functionalities. Zero sum, and I always say, forgive me for using this kind of language, but when I was a graduate student, actually here at U of T, everybody was doing game theory, and zero sum was it. But for me, the eternal optimist, I preferred positive sum, because positive sum, see, zero sum means you can have an increase in one interest, one functionality, but by necessity it requires a decrease in another, such that the two total to a sum of 0. In my world, that doesn't cut it, because I can assure you, when these things happen, it's always at the expense of privacy. It's rarely the reverse. So we explore positive sum solutions where you can have 2 positive increments of 2 different areas at the same time, concurrently. It's a doubly enabling paradigm. And people that I've spoken to in the security areas, the techies I've spoken to, engineers, they've said to me that whenever they've been tasked with actually having to design systems that deliver both privacy and security, they've always been able to do it. It's not that big a deal, but they have to be tasked right at the beginning, the creation of the system. And so I ask everyone to do that, whatever you're engaged in terms of health informatics or research, do it with privacy in mind at the design stage. It's much easier to do, and the end result is a multiple positive sum solution. So in this case, with Khaled and Craig Earle's example that I just talked about in terms of the homomorphic encryption, that's what it delivers. You can do the health research you want, you can do the analytics you want, and you preserve privacy. Win-win, double enabling systems. It's outstanding. Okay, I'm getting close to the end. This is unrelated to health information specifically, but I want you to keep in mind. If there's a breach and we come and investigate, and you say to me, well, we have a privacy policy. The policy says we're supposed to encrypt the data before transferring it to a USB key. There's the policy. And what's the breach? Oh, we had a USB key and the data were not encrypted. I don't care if you have a policy. Your policy is not enough. It has to be reflected in the actual practices of your organization. So you got to walk the talk. You got to make sure that your frontline staff know not only that the data are supposed to be encrypted before transferring it to USB key, but how you do that. They need to be told how to do that. You can't assume that they're going to know these things. Assume nothing. In this particular case, it related to an investigation with Elections Ontario, and something like 2.4 million people's information is now gone because it was transferred to a USB key, which got lost or stolen, and wasn't encrypted. How can that be? They have a policy that says it's supposed to be encrypted. The saddest part of this was that the poor person at the front line doing the USB transfer was told the data was supposed to be encrypted, but had not been told what that meant or how you do it. I do not fault her in the least. She tried to figure it out. She went online and tried to unearth what it meant, and the closest she came to was zipping the data. You know that zipping the data does not equal encrypting the data. It's compressing the data. But she didn't know. No one told her that. I mean, you can't expect people to know these things. Encryption is not something that is trivial. So if we come to investigate, please just show me that you have taken some measure to reflect the policy of your office relating to privacy in your actual practices. You have to do both. Now, we have a number of tools. I have them here if any of you are interested on things you can do. If you actually do have a privacy breach, you should have a protocol in place in terms of what you should be doing, how do you contain the damage. We have this system, Stop, Think, Protect, in terms of before you do anything with your data, ensure that you put the proper thought process in place. There are many, many measures that you can engage in. All of this is accessible to you. I just want to conclude now by asking you always to make privacy a leading consideration in the design of your operations. It is eminently doable. Privacy by design is real and actionable. And if you don't do it, if you don't lead with privacy by design, as my colleague Kai Rennenberg in Germany has called it, then I guarantee you will have privacy by disaster. And then I'll have to come knocking at your door, and you won't want that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
So I heard Dr. Cavoukian 3-4 weeks ago, and this was like 80% different. I don't know how you do it.
I try not to make them the same because the same people might be in the audience.
That's true, and you're such a great storyteller. So Alex Franklin, what's your question?
I'm just thinking, Commissioner Cavoukian, problem that doctors have is that patients tend to disclose themselves, and you've just disclosed to the world that you fortunately are healthy at the moment, but probably had a non-malignant spinal tumor.
Wrong. Go higher. Here's my response to that. When I said privacy is all about control, I meant it. And by that I mean it's my choice whether I wish to disclose my personal information. Privacy is not a religion. You don't have to keep this data confidential if you don't want to. I would say privacy doesn't equal secrecy. It equals control. So my choice is to share that information because I believe it serves a purpose, and hopefully it will allow my messaging to be better received by the health sector, because I'm eminently concerned about health-related issues. But I would never expect someone else to do that. But if it is also their choice, then the privacy issue is honored because you're allowing the individual to determine the fate of his or her personal information, informational self-determination. So I don't see a conflict there.
So you know that in a couple of weeks we're going to have one of the world's leading analytics experts. I'm going to make sure he takes a look at the presentation and gives his side of it, right?
Great.
As a numbers
and
guy.
Ask him if he's familiar with Dr. Khaled El-Imam's de-identification tool.
I'll do that if I can pronounce it. All right, it's a tough area. Who's got some more questions? I don't have a. Here we go. Way over here. I'm gonna.
Your comment about the kind of default rules, and then you later then talked about the kind of power of anonymized aggregate data. Do you see any kind of appetite in Ontario or Canada to having patients be opted into sharing of that aggregate de-identified information?
They did an experiment, I don't know if it's an experiment at McMaster, a number of years ago, excuse me, early on, to see if you had the opt-in positive consent model of allowing patients to use their data. Excuse me. And it wasn't, I think it wasn't so much that patients wanted to say no. I think it was more the case that when you're a patient, you've got a lot going on. The least of your concerns at that time are research applications and other things. So I think, you know, that model of you're very busy and you're running around and you're looking at your meds and what are the next procedures and things. So the result of the study at McMaster was that if they relied on opt-in positive consent for their research, they couldn't do research. They didn't have a sufficient pool of data to enable them to do excuse me, the research that they contemplated. So I'm a big fan of positive consent opt-in. The only area that I deviate from that is in the area of health research, because as you know, and especially for epidemiological studies, even a small percentage of the population opting out or not opting in can skew the data significantly. So given that fact, and you have to understand, I'm a psychologist, my background is research design. I think it's extremely important to have proper data sets in health research. And it is only for that reason that I think the opt-in model is not particularly effective in a health sector. So my response to that is not to weaken privacy, but to point to Dr. El-Imam's types of solutions where you access the full data set, but you de-identify the data, or you encrypt the data and then do the mathematical calculations in the encrypted space such that you get the full benefit of the full data set, but it's in encrypted form, so the privacy harm has been eliminated without weakening or reducing the data set by relying on opt-in.
Thanks. Is client consent enough to then transmit their information electronically in a non-encrypted form? So we have client reports that are being shared. I work at a children's mental health facility, and we're trying to share them amongst different community partners to come to the same meeting. If clients consent to have that record shared via email and it's not encrypted, is that enough to allow us to do that, or would that still be considered a breach of privacy?
A lot better than not having it. Here's my concern, and this is a tough one because you want information shared. I mean, I talk to my docs online because everybody's busy and I want to hear things, and so I have communications as well. So I understand the importance of being able to share information electronically. You want to do it in the most secure way possible, so the methodology in terms of the security associated with that will speak to the issue. Positive consent in that context absolutely helps, but you can still You can still have, obviously, breaches. Now, when you say online, I'm assuming you're not talking about portable devices, USB keys, etc. You're talking about
Email transmission, so send a report from this agency to this agency, because we're all coming to the same meeting. Or
I'm-
a client wants their something.
so if you had a breach and I came to investigate, I would not equate that on the same level of severity as having transferred identifiable health data to a portable device like a USB key, which is susceptible to loss or theft. If you're dealing with secure email transmissions, you're shaking your head, it's not secure.
It wouldn't be considered secure.
Right.
It's not within the same agency. So it's not across the internet.
So I can't just right now just give you my blessing on that.
Can you give me your non-blessing on it?
What I'm going to say is let's talk afterwards, because I also value you being able to communicate with your patients. And the fact that you're leading with positive consent from them is very, very positive. And maybe we can talk about how we can structure it so that you can enhance the security of those communications. Let's talk.
So can you come to the next breakfast with the chief and just tell us what happened? After she says it. Might get a good crowd for that one, eh? Any more questions?
I have a question up here.
Nice and loud, please.
I'll say it loudly. So hospitals are a very complicated web of multinational information systems, and we have service providers all over the globe helping hospitals succeed here. We've tried to implement unlimited liability clauses in our contracts to protect our privacy considerations, but vendors have been balking at that. What is the best way to balance the hospital's risk with the vendor's need to do an appropriate commercial business with us?
I don't know exactly what that means, so let me
So we're concerned about privacy breaches with potential foreign vendors who have access to our data sets and access to our information.
outsourcing kinds of issues?
So there is some outsourcing, but most of the vendors that we use in Canada provide information systems from a foreign country. So whether
Which
it
is
be,
not a problem. Okay, let me speak generally, and then we'll speak afterwards as well on the specifics. You have to get the best service you can and the best vendors, and they don't all reside in Canada. I get that. For that reason, we've always said you can outsource your services wherever you want. What you can't do is outsource accountability. So if there's a privacy breach, you remain accountable. They serve as your agent, if you will, the vendors. And we would look at what kind of contracts do you have with them? What kind of binding corporate rules do you have? There's a whole tradition of binding corporate rules and contractual relationships with them that impose certain protections and certain requirements that you have on them to protect the data. Those are all the things we would examine, is how solid is the framework that you have in place with those vendors, and does it protect the patients significantly from risk? And those are the kinds of things we would look at. You can certainly do it, but you always remain accountable, and so we would look to you and look at the kind of infrastructure you've put in place. Happy to talk to you further afterwards.
Dr. Cavoukian, I'd like to thank you very much for coming out. You had a great audience, but what a great presentation. I'm sure it'll be re-seen many times on the web. And we thank you very much for coming out today. And I'd like to thank you for coming out to breakfast with the Chiefs.